Hello everyone, this is actually my face. We won't be seeing my face for very long because today I want to talk about sea slugs in a way that is a little bit different to how I've spoken about sea slugs before. Normally we go through the biology, ecology of sea slugs in general. Today I'd like to talk very much about Thailand specific and about sea slugs based on the research that's been carried out both by myself and others in Thailand over the past, well, long time. So feel free to zoom in and my face will disappear. So we're going to talk about the history and future of sea slugs in Thailand, a little bit on the past, but I'd like to focus at the very end about how we can contribute to sea slug understanding in Thailand and globally, and what we can do to document that further. So to begin, here are just some of the sea slugs that we have described in Thai waters over the past 20 odd years. So on the left we have sea slugs being described by the late Dr. Cornelius Swennen. On the right we have a few sea slugs described by the conservation diver team and myself. And these are just a handful of them. There's a lot more than these, but suffice to say that sea slugs and sea slug discovery in Thai waters is a slow but ongoing process. We're still finding a lot of new species, a lot of interesting species, and here I am going to talk about what that means for Thailand marine science with regards to sea slugs anyway. So here's a little graph. This is, by the way, if you hadn't noticed, this talk is going to be more for the sea slug fan community than some of the other talks. So there are going to be charts, there's going to be graphs, and there's going to be sciencey stuff. This graph shows the diversity of sea slugs that is officially documented in Thai waters according to the scientific literature between 1989 and 2019. There is going to be another spike at the end of 2019-2020 in the coming months. But this shows you a general increase specifically for the Gulf of Thailand, and then for Thailand and for Andaman side and Gulf of Thailand combined. The actual first discovery of sea slugs and the proper science about their diversity started in 1902, which largely focused on the Gulf of Thailand, specifically the Eastern Gulf, Chonburi, all the way from Chonburi down to Trat. And in the past century or so, there has been not much in terms of their understanding their ecology. This is not something specific to Thailand, but this is something that we're seeing globally until recent years, more focused on aspects such as taxonomy, understanding their diversity, the discovery of new species, their biomedical properties, but less about how they interact with other species, how they interact with one another, their food preferences, influence their food, etc. So that has been a real passion of mine, to be able to help expand our understanding of their ecology. So first, let's get a slightly different perspective on their distribution. Here is where Thailand sits in a range of countries and the current approximate diversity of sea slug species throughout the Indo-Pacific. Thailand Old is basically prior to my PhD, and Thailand New is what is after my PhD. Much of this is yet to be published, but yeah, we're still getting there. As you can see, a lot of work has been done by prominent academics in the Philippines, and therefore we have a lot of discoveries and a lot of documentation from within the Philippines. What we will likely see is that these bars will increase over the next few decades as more and more work is done on them. But all of this shows us is the number of species of this enigmatic group of organisms that are found in the waters of arbitrary national borders. So, what have we done to explore some of their ecology? This is work done in Thailand. For those that have been following some of the research, this is probably some of my proudest work, where we documented that sea slugs are sometimes, if not often, prey to certain types of corals. This is corals feeding on sea slugs. Different species tend to have different levels of palatability, meaning different species of sea slugs. So all the corals that we tested seem to like some species more than others. Sizes play some sort of a role. And this showed us that this was not only something we tested, this is something that we were able to observe in the natural environment without any human intervention multiple times over a period of 4 years. So This shows us that an type of organism such as sea slugs that are famously toxic without having too many natural predators are actually have potential predators in plain sight throughout most of the tropics, at least, which are these corals, because we assume that corals are small. In fact, many people don't actually understand what a coral is, but corals are animals. They are animals that feed like most animals, and they take up prey, they ingest prey, and what we see here is sometimes they will ingest prey and sometimes they will reject prey. There's a lot more to understand about that, but this is a very interesting ecological interaction that we were able to expand on. We never expected this. This was something that surprised many parts of the academic community, because there is a general guesstimate that corals are able to feed on small things, planktonic things, so organic matter, particular or dissolved organic matter, and small copepods and things. In recent years we've been able to document larger animals being prey, so sea slugs, jellyfish. So corals are significantly more voracious predators than we've given them credit for. The analogy that some people have used is the Sarlacc pit from Star Wars, for any geeks out there. This is not that different, apparently. So, changes our understanding of what can eat sea slugs and what corals can eat, which was a great step forward in understanding coral ecology as well. Another aspect of ecology is we began to document a great diversity of coral feeding sea slugs. This is particularly popular this year, as we were able to describe a species from Thailand that feeds on coral that we will talk about. Many of these corals have zooxanthellae in them, which are the microalgae that corals have that allow them to use solar energy to sustain themselves, so they become solar powered. A particular interest is that some corals eat slugs, some slugs eat corals. This is a little bit of circle of life going on here. And we were able to document the number of corals in a particular part of the Gulf that were hosting sea slugs, which were basically acting as parasites, feeding on the coral tissue itself without actually killing the coral. But there's a lot we have yet to explore. Going on from that, further documenting sea slug food, we have found numerous sea slug species that feed on hydroids that are specific to one environment or another. This is once again part of my PhD thesis that spoke about hydroids that live in soft sediment habitats versus coral reefs, and the predatory nudibranchs that they support. We have been able to expand the diversity of our understanding of their prey and what controls their populations a little bit in certain areas. For example, while we might find a certain prey in a place, that does not necessarily mean you will find its predator. And likewise, when you are able to find a predator in a place, you are likely to be able to find a specific prey that the nudibranchs feed on. This is important because in parts of the world we've been able to use these as indicators for large-scale change in marine environments, including changes driven by climate. So, in terms of the new species that we've been able to document, here's the more popular one from earlier this year. This is the coral-feeding nudibranch Festila V that feeds on the coral Pavona explanulata. A couple of months after that, a sister species called Festila fuscostriata was found feeding on a different species of coral. So we are beginning to have a greater idea that a number of these corals have extremely well camouflaged parasitic nudibranchs feeding on them. And not only are they feeding on the coral tissue, we have strong evidence, which we can see at the bottom here, that they are able to take up, as I mentioned earlier, the microalgae, the zooxanthellae that support the coral host into their own tissues and make themselves photosynthetically active. They become solar powered. It is then a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. This is an aspect of nudibranch ecology that is fascinating, to see how these motile gastropods can use the energy from the sun to sustain themselves alongside the food that they naturally consume. Because evolution, as we can see in the top photo, makes them so incredibly well camouflaged, who knows how many other species are hiding in amongst corals that we see so regularly. Another thing we don't know is, do they threaten coral health? We know that these are parasites. They sustain themselves by being parasitic on their coral hosts. Does that mean that the corals themselves are threatened by these parasites, or are they able to maintain this relationship without too much stress on their coral hosts? There's a lot more investigation that needs to happen here. So this is a coral reef specific range of discoveries, shifting habitat here. We have some of the earliest species that I was able to work on. This is Armina scotti and Armina occulta. Armina scotti, named after Chad Scott, a pioneer of marine conservation and reef restoration work here in Thailand, and a friend of mine. And Armina scotti was previously confused with a species called Armina semperi. We were able to clarify that in fact that refers to a different description, and the species that we've been finding is in fact a new species. And then another species, the larger one, Armina occulta, has been confused with this earlier species, occulta coming from the Latin for hidden or secret. Absolutely not a reference to the heavy metal music that myself and co-authors like to listen to. I'll let you make your own conclusions. But that was confused for the Armina scotti nudibranch, and without people going out into their natural habitat, which in this case is the muck environment, the soft sediments, the deeper soft sediments that host a whole variety of organisms away from the coral reef, people were less exposed to these different species, and therefore we were more able as a community of scuba enthusiasts to assume that they're both the same species, or they're a species that has a simple name. But once we were able to clarify both their genetics and morphology, we were able to identify that in fact evolutionarily they are largely unrelated, apart from being in the same genus. And who knows what else is hiding out there in the muck. That drove us to a number of other studies and discoveries, including the most recent one. This is the paper that was published 2 weeks ago. This is Elysia autai. This is one of two species that we published in that paper. And this was working to address a taxonomic confusion of 107 years old, which is the complex of Elysia japonica, described from Japan, with arguably inadequate or incomplete understanding of the species. And we have a number of species that are part of this complex. We don't really know where the Thai species fits into this complex, other than the fact that it is distinct or likely distinct from the species descriptions that we found, and so we were able to describe it as a new species that at present is only found in the Gulf of Thailand, with some records from Australia and Guam. This figure is to show that these 5 individuals here, while they may look quite different, at least in their coloration, are in fact the same species, all recorded from the muck habitats of Koh Tao, and are all corresponding to Elysia autai. The only way we will find out if these other species in this complex from throughout the rest of the Indo-Pacific are related to this is they need to be studied in more detail and then compared to the literature, including our own. So this is beginning to break down taxonomic puzzles. So why do I bring up these latter points? This is the next aspect of ecology and a prime focus of mine that we've been working on, which is the importance and relevance of the muck habitat. The Gulf of Thailand can be simplified as a shallow, sandy bowl that has the deepest point of approximately 85 meters, although the average depth is approximately 50 meters. So compared to other large bodies of water, it is extremely shallow, with a lot of sedimentation and freshwater inundation from the rivers, the large rivers that flow into it, which means the substrate composition, the sea floor of a lot of the Gulf of Thailand is sandy, is silty, and there are certain kinds of organisms that can only grow and survive in these areas. This is what we're seeing from our initial explorations, both with sea slugs and other organisms. So here's another look at that. This was an incredibly attractive graphic designed by a colleague of mine, Pau Urgel Plaza, who is now in Catalonia. And this highlights that we are able to see different species and therefore supporting different ecology when we start to get to environments slightly further from the reef. This is not always the case, but in many parts of the Gulf of Thailand, as you expand beyond the reef, you can get to the muck habitats that host different kinds of soft corals and algae and other cnidarians. So, All good. So, the muck is host to a range of species diversity that historically we had assumed were just beyond what we see on the natural reef. As we have now catalogued over 11,000 observations from Koh Tao specifically, where we were able to document 100 new records, species records for Thailand, we've been able to find that in fact half of the species, or at least, well, 80% of species, are exclusive to one habitat or another. So 40% of all species are exclusive to coral reefs. Another 40% are exclusive to soft sediments. What that tells us is that if you are not out there exploring these muck habitats away from the coral reef, we are missing out on 40% of the diversity at least that can be found in at least the waters around Koh Tao. If this is in fact the case for the rest of the Gulf, there is a huge wealth of diversity that is being unexplored, and in turn a huge range of ecological interactions that we don't have the chance to understand and to document, which may tell us more about how the marine community and marine ecological community of the seafloor of the Gulf of Thailand is influenced by, say, for example, human influences. There's a lot we don't understand, therefore we have significantly more questions than we have answers. So what does this lead us to? The whole point of all of this spiel was for me to highlight the importance of being able to document and observe more species. This is one of the frontiers of sea slug documentation and also marine science documentation. There is a logo that for some reason is there. Slug Thailand. Citizen science is one of the most important aspects of marine scientific documentation in Thailand right now. We have citizen science projects affiliated with whale sharks and manta rays and jellyfish and sea turtles and sea turtles. Check out the live stream from earlier to find out more. But Slug Thailand is a very popular Facebook page that allows scuba divers and snorkelers from around Thailand to provide their own observations of different sea slugs, and based on purely Slug Thailand Facebook group, we've been able to find 5,000 observations of different sea slugs, with over 3,500 people following or contributing sea slug records. And I can tell you at least a little bit that based on the observations that people have made, we are making a huge increase in the diversity of species that we are documenting from Thailand. And there are some extremely important ecological discoveries, such as where in Thailand we're able to find certain food sources, certain types of corals that we can extrapolate purely from people submitting observations of sea slugs. There's a lot of interesting discoveries yet to come. So I encourage anybody who is interested in diving or snorkeling in Thailand to please look out for sea slugs. They are everywhere if you look close enough. They're not all tiny, some of them are tiny. But feel free to submit them to the Slug Thailand group at this URL, or check out the Slug Thailand page. And if you want to continue to support sea slug research in Thailand, whether that includes more species or further exploration of muck environments, feel free to purchase this book and check out the new Thai Marine Ecology Center conducting fieldwork in Chonburi and Rayong, where we will be doing a lot more sea slug research and working on understanding more of their ecology in the Gulf of Thailand. So thank you very much. Check out the website, check out the stuff, check out all of this. Please, please, thank you. Done. Oh look, we found a new species. It appeared from somewhere. We will name this Unidentia Ju. Thank you. I completely forgot about that last